Recently, I thought of the idea of geolocating certain places in video games. This sounded like a fun activity to learn more about our own world by studying a fictional one. Now, how could we find out where a fictional location is in real life? To make this thought experiment work, we must use principles from geography, such as environment and the study of architecture and history, to pin down certain places. For example, if a desert in a story is a colder desert for most of the year, we could eliminate deserts on the globe that don't meet that criteria. I wanted the first video of this series to be about the game Hunt Showdown and its sequels because of the uniqueness of the setting. You see, for a setting in a video game to have a profound impact on the player, it must have direct effects on the story and the way you interact with the environment to survive. While playing on the 3 Louisiana maps, the player chooses how to navigate the water, and each time you choose, it always has life or death implications. You can decide to cross a bridge to save time, therefore exposing yourself in every direction. You could quickly wade across the water, keeping a lower visual profile at the cost of your noise signature. Or you could slowly creep through the aquatic plants, which make you very safe unless you're spotted, and then all of a sudden you're very unsafe because you can't move that fast. This dilemma with the water is very different than other video games, where a map's geography works as a skin rather than a gameplay feature. For example, in Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, the multiplayer maps have a wide variety of settings, but the settings still funnel you down a limited number of routes, whether that is a hallway in an airport or a cave in Afghanistan. A good setting in a video game also affects the story. To outsiders, Louisiana is a weird and sometimes creepy place. Other than the witch hunts that took place in New England, Louisiana is the state that has the most street cred when it comes to the occult. A fortune teller in New Orleans just seems more sincere than a fortune teller in Cleveland. The many meat hooks, bodies, and bosses you find make the bayou feel like a dangerous place that you shouldn't linger in. If you don't think the setting in a video game matters, imagine if one of the levels of It Takes Two took place in an emergency room waiting area, with the boss being an antibiotic crushing MRSA strain. The environment. Louisiana has natural resources that make the industries in the area unique. Historically, longleaf pine and cypress trees were the targets of heavy logging. The resin of longleaf pine trees were used for turpentine, and cypresses were extremely valuable water-resistant lumber. I even read one source that said the shingles made from cypress wood sometimes matched the durability of other materials such as slate when it came to roof tiles. And here is where in Louisiana you could find those two plants. There are also plants like the spatterdock and the dwarf palmetto, which looks like my favorite type of palm tree, which is the fan palm, that could be found in Louisiana and are also found in the game. Out of all these plants, the spatterdock and longleaf pine give us the biggest clues of where in Louisiana certain maps have to be. There's a specific location on the map of Lawson Delta that heavily narrows down the search criteria. Unlike farms or slaughterhouses, forts are far less common since they cost money rather than make money. The fort, the site of the training mode, is a great tell of the location. It is an example of a place in fiction being inspired by multiple things rather than just one, which I think is really cool. The design looks like Fort Jackson and Fort St. Philip on the Mississippi River. And it has a surrounding environment that looks like where Fort Bisland would have been and shows evidence of a battle on the scale of Fort Hudson, minus the gigantic breaches, which Fort Hudson didn't have. Fort Jackson and Fort St. Philip were these twin pair of forts that straddled the Mississippi River in southern Louisiana. Because they were built before the Civil War, Fort Jackson had a design that was very similar to what we would call star forts or bastion forts. Some of the characteristics of forts of this time were angled bastions and, get ready for it, glacis. See, forts needed to be thicker to withstand cannon fire. This seems obvious to us, but there was this period in history where cannons were facing these much older castles that were tall to withstand infantry assaults, but they were relatively thin, and they didn't have as much earthworks to deflect and absorb the shock of cannon fire. So engineers in Italy came up with a solution to this. The solution was an emphasis on wall thickness, using brick and dirt in tandem to absorb shock better, and earthworks outside the fort that were borrowed from older doctrines. And so the fort in the game does seem to match the dimensions of Fort Jackson, specifically the height and the width of the walls. And for the location of the fort, I would have to say it's where Fort Bisland was. Fort Bisland, though it wasn't as built up as Fort Jackson, it was in a swamp, and there was this narrow tract of land between impassable areas, and that's why Fort Bisland was so valuable. And if you look outside from the walls, imagine trying to get a supply train through that area. So it does seem that the location itself does seem to favor Bisland over Jackson, because it's not right on a river like Jackson was. It can't be Fort Hudson, because the woods surrounding Fort Hudson seem more of the temperate woods that you would see in Appalachia rather than the woods that you see in the game. A few more things about the forts is that the cannons on the walls seem to be Navy Brook cannons, and the citadel in the center is also very similar to the Fort Jackson citadel. Now, what do I mean by that is, so as you can see in the video right here, was where the troops slept. And notice how all these bunks there and stuff, Fort Jackson, even though the fort surrendered in real life, mortar fire caused the citadel of the fort to catch fire. And a lot of the troops that were stationed there had to withstand the siege with no spare clothes or bedding because it was all burnt out. But the fort was so strong that even though they had fires large enough to burn all their clothing and bedding, most people in the fort survived until surrender. So again, I would say the location seems to be where Bisland was with a design of Fort Jackson. So with the above information, combining that with the plans information from before, I would have to say the map Lawson Delta is located where Fort Bisland was, which is in the city of Franklin, which is in the parish of St. Mary. Now, if you're going by the plant life and the environment, it's more closely related to the neighboring parish of Terrebonne, specifically the southern half of Terrebonne. But those parishes do border each other. All right, everybody. Thank you for watching. Please leave me feedback down below and other video games and maps you would like me to do this for. This is my first time doing this, of course, so feel free to leave video editing tips as well. All right, everybody. Thank you for watching. Have a great day. Bye.